Right. Well, it seems like we're waded into the waters. We're getting into it, and it's real. I think it's good that it's real. It's good that it's stirring up real experiences, because I'm a firm believer that the only place in our lives that we will ever encounter or find God is in reality. And reality, as we know, is not easy. Most of the time, it's tough. It's not what we wish it would be. And yet that's exactly where God is. That God is with us in reality, and that's it. So when we go to experience God's mercy, healing, authentic growth, it can only happen in reality. Not in the way that we wish things were, but in that lingering, bitter anger, that frustration, that resentment that we might still hold. It's there that God is present. And that's a great kind of, I think, way to step back into this story. Now mindful of our own reality. Hopefully our own experiences or relationships that could use some forgiveness and reconciliation. And as we do this, as we enter into this time of reflection, we bring all that to God and to each other, knowing that this is a community that we can trust. We can be ourselves. So I invite you to read along as we enter back into this story. Then Jesus said, "A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me.' So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, 'How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat, but here am I, dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father ordered his servants, 'Quickly, bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring in his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what this might mean. The servant said to him, 'Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' He became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to his father in reply, 'Look, all these years I have served you, and not once did I disobey your orders. Yet you never gave me even a goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son returns, who swallowed up your property with prostitutes, for him you slaughter the fattened calf.' He said to him, 'My son, you are here with me always. Everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.'" There's a sense, as you brought up, where we kind of want to know, where is justice in this story? Who's in the right and who's in the wrong? And I think clearly the father, even though he doesn't choose the just response, it's tough to get angry at the father. As we said yesterday, he represents God the Father, who chooses mercy over justice. And he does so like a kid on Christmas morning. Again, that's the image that Jesus gives us. It's that God the Father literally cannot wait. He's so excited and eager to forgive us that he can't wait to just tear up our sins and get rid of them. And then we have the prodigal son, who clearly nobody's going to say he's in the right. He completely rejected the family, but now that he's back and he's forgiven, I think most people would say he's on his way back to justice. Like he's stepping back into a new life. He's kind of on the right path. But then there's the older brother, the reluctant brother or son, who doesn't want to have anything to do with this. And I think most of us are quick to judge that older brother. But I think that the thing that remains is that we don't know why he doesn't want to join the party. Most of the time, even theologians, as they speculate, they're saying, like, maybe he represents the scribes, the Pharisees, people who are reluctant to sign in for God's mercy. We kind of want to make him out to be a bad guy, thinking that there needs to be a bad guy in every story. But I don't know if that's really what Jesus intended. And I think, again, Francis of Assisi in his life maybe has a good example of this and a good kind of way to enter into reflecting on what the deal is with this older son. So Francis of Assisi, again, after he had founded his order, a bunch of monasteries all over the Italian countryside, he would go from one monastery to the next, visiting with his brothers, praying with them, and just kind of enkindling that sense of community, of peace, of joy that the Franciscans have always been known for. And so the story goes, he's on his way from one monastery to another as he passes by a town called Gubbio. Gubbio is this really small town out in the hill country of Italy. Really nothing noticeable about the town at all, really small town. Francis is passing through. As he gets to the town, the people of the town come up to him and they say, "Francis, you have to help us. We're in crisis. We have this wolf that resides up in the hills that's been terrorizing our town for months, and we don't know what to do. He comes down, ransacks our houses, eats our food, even gets into the storage units where we've been storing food for the winter. And he terrorizes our children and threatens them. And he's just this evil, bitter monster that continues to invade us." And so the people are communicating this. And to understand the story, Italians have a long history with wolves. Like, Italians, for some reason, have chosen that wolves are the bad guys of creation. There's an expression in Italian, if you want to wish someone good luck, like let's say you're going to take an exam, what they'll say is, "in bocca al lupo," like in the mouth of the wolf. And the idea is like, put a bomb in the mouth of a wolf, an explosive device. And then the response is, we would say like, "thank you." They would say, "crepi il lupo," like, let's blow up the wolf. So it's this idea, like, wolves are bad guys. So when Francis encounters this story, this town who's been ransacked and terrorized by this wolf, he understands what they're saying. Like, this is a bad guy. And this is evil. It's invading the town and terrorizing the people. So he surmises, Francis does, where the wolf lives, because the people say where it's been coming from. So he takes a day to kind of get ready spiritually, to pray for what to do. And the next morning, the whole town gathers around Francis as he goes up the hill into the woods. It's dark woods, very thick woods. And the people are shocked and increasingly afraid because they see that Francis is going up empty-handed. He doesn't have a spear, doesn't have a knife. He's just going up empty-handed, his habit, his rosary, his rope that goes around his waist, and that was it. And so they start murmuring with themselves, just, here we go again. It's not going to work. Francis goes up, and as the story goes, he wanders through the dark of the woods and eventually finds the wolf. And in that just typical Francis fashion, he approaches the wolf and says, "Brother wolf, what is troubling you? Brother wolf, why do you do this to these people? They're afraid of you. You've taken their food. Their children are in hiding because of what you're doing. Are you okay?" And the story goes, the wolf begins to cry. He says, "I was abandoned in these woods years ago. My pack left me. I have no one. No one taught me how to get food, so in order to survive, I have to go down there. And these people meet me with sticks and stones. They throw these rocks at me, and they try to kill me. And the only way I can survive is to take what I can." And so Francis sits with the wolf. They talk, and they're just present to each other. And he even spends the night up in the hill. And we could just imagine, again, in that Francis of Assisi, just personality, the two would have sat there, I'm sure, looking up at the stars over the town of Gubbio, just in peace, just residing in each other's presence. And then the next day, the two go down the hill into the town. And of course, as the people are watching, they naturally would have been watching the hill all night, all morning. They see the two coming down. They think, oh no, the wolf has convinced Francis to join him. So they go running into their houses, lock their houses. Francis and the wolf get down into the main town square. People are still locked up. So then Francis goes around and invites the people from the town to come out to the town square. He has something to share with them. So the people come out, and they're naturally a little hesitant to do so. But then Francis tells them the whole story about this. Our brother Wolf, was abandoned in the woods. This is what he has experienced. And then he has this conversation, and he invites the people of the town to share what they've experienced. The fear, the pain, the loss of food. And in the kind of mutual sharing, then Francis says, what if we could find a solution? What if we could all work together? What if the people of the town could give you, Brother Wolf, food? And then, in return, you could provide a watchful eye to protect them. If there are any other invaders that might come or intrude in the town, you could be their protector, and they'll take care of you. You'll have a place. And the people thought about it. The wolf thought about it. And they all said, that we can do that. That's something that we can do. And a couple of days later, Francis leaves the town. Eventually, of course, they build a huge Franciscan monastery in Gubbio. And this legend goes on to be just kind of a mark of peace, that maybe there's another way to look at people that we think are bad guys. Think about, too, a few weeks ago, we had that gospel passage. It was probably maybe the first or second Sunday of Lent, where Jesus encounters a fig tree that was producing no fruit. So it's this barren fig tree. It's completely shut off from the outside world in isolation. It's a symbol for our sin, our struggles in life. And the owner of the orchard wants to chop it down because it's worth nothing. It's dead. It has nothing to offer. And Jesus, as the gardener, says, what if we look at it a different way? What if we cultivate the soil just a little bit differently? Maybe then this fig tree will bear fruit. And in that, I think we see God's mercy. That maybe God's mercy is able to see things in a different way. And in that light, maybe we can see the older son in a different way. Approach him a little bit differently, not with judgment, but first, like Francis and the Wolf of Gubbio, to seek understanding. And I think maybe the older son, the reluctant son, doesn't want to join the party because the younger son really hurt him. Because maybe something, even before he left, maybe that's even the reason the prodigal son left, is because he struck a wound in his older brother that was so deep that he couldn't reconcile. And so he leaves. Maybe that's what happened. Or maybe there's something else that even the parents who are throwing this party don't know about. That the younger son, or the older son carries in his heart, and he's just not ready to forgive. And I think there are a lot of people who can relate to that. There are a lot of people who can relate to that experience of just not being able, not being ready to forgive. And there are also some situations where it doesn't make sense for us to fully reconcile. Maybe we can forgive in our hearts, but there are relationships where we probably should never go back to the way things were before. And that's a painful reality, but it's a reality. I had an experience with this. I think it was the week right before Lent started, so about a month ago, we had a gospel passage where Jesus encouraged us to love our enemies, pray for those who hurt you, love them, and reconcile with them. And I have to tell you that I think was a pretty challenging reading and homily. But starting that day until now, I've had 6 different conversations, completely unrelated, completely unprovoked, with people who are experiencing the same thing that the reluctant son experiences. And it's all been in parent-child relationships. So 6 different conversations, again, completely independent of each other, where people have come up to me and said, I haven't spoken to my parents in 20 years. And some didn't go into any detail. Some went into very painful details. That my parents kicked me out as a teenager. And since then, I haven't heard from them. I've tried reaching out. And I'm at the point where if I try again, I know the heartbreak is going to be too much to bear. So I'm just living with it the way it is. I've heard parents, too. It's really kind of tragic story. These parents had a junior in high school who was having some real struggles. They didn't know how to deal with it. And then their child goes off to college. Now the child's been in college 2.5 years and refuses to talk to them. They've even driven out to visit their child at college. They'll text him and say, hey, we're here, right, in the quad. No response. 2.5 years of silence. Christmas, Easter, birthdays, nothing. There's so many families that experience that every day. Yesterday we were talking about that pain that the father must have felt, missing his son, feeling the absence of his son. There are so many families, so many parents, so many kids who feel that same pain. And I think if we're going to be realistic, we have to acknowledge that some of those relationships are not going to be fully reconciled. It's not going to happen. That there are relationships, again, that have been broken so severely that we cannot make them whole again. That have been torn apart so thoroughly that we cannot mend them. But that is where God's mercy comes in. Because God's mercy is able to do what we cannot. Even in this situation, we're kind of thinking about how could God forgive Rudolf Hess? And that's a real question. That's a real question that we should wrestle with, that we should sit with, because it's not comfortable. Or how could we forgive someone who seriously hurt us? Sometimes we can't. But that doesn't mean that God can't. God is able to do what we cannot. God is able to make whole what we have broken, and God's able to mend what we have torn. And that's just a part of who God is. And Lent is an opportunity for us to trust in God. And we don't know what that is going to look like. It probably, for many of these relationships, the 6 conversations that I had, probably not going to happen in this life. But I think it's worth it to imagine how it's going to happen in heaven. How God, in God's infinite wisdom, in God's eternal plan, is going to be able to reconcile what we can't. And just to imagine that. I had an experience, I guess it was 4 years ago. It was a really, really tragic funeral. A 23-year-old had died in very unexpected, tragic circumstances. And this death, the 23-year-old, was the second death in a year that this family had endured. And the other one was very tragic and unexpected too. So this family is just wrecked by sorrow, grief, and pain, incredible trauma. But on top of that, the family was bitterly divided. There were kind of 2 sides. And in the experience of trauma, they cut each other off entirely. And that played out at the funeral in a really painful way. As the funeral mass started, the two sides took their post on either side of the aisle. And you could just see it. You could see them going into their tribe, like circling the wagons. And the two kind of leaders or heads of the two sides sat alone in the front pew on either side of the aisle. And just looking out at this, as Mass started, as we're blessing the casket, as I'm trying to preach the homily, it was literally painful to see. I mean, you knew that this family was divided, and it was a bitter division in the midst of this trauma and pain. But then something happened. When it came time for communion, I step out, the pastor of that parish was right next to me, and we step out right in the center of the front of the center aisle. And we're there to distribute communion. And these two stand up, they turn and face each other. They make eye contact, and then they step into the center aisle and hug. It was powerful. The two reach out and embrace each other. I start crying because I know that these two people hate each other. Like they had literally told me that morning how much they hate each other and they wish that the other one wasn't there. But in that moment, in receiving the Eucharist, they embraced. They came up to receive together at the same time. They said amen as one. And then they turned around and went back to their pews. And I want to be totally realistic. I don't think that those two people have spoken to each other since that day. And I don't think that they will ever speak to each other in this life. But in that moment, we saw what God's mercy is capable of. And I think we saw a glimpse of what heaven is going to be like. And it's something that is beyond us, that maybe we can't do it, but God's mercy can. And so we trust in God's mercy. We wade out into the deep waters, trusting in God, suspending ourselves in trust. There's a really tragic end to Francis's story. And I think this, if any of you at hearing the story of the prodigal son, or at hearing this story about this family that's divided, if that stirs up pain in your heart because that's you as well, know that you're in good company. You are not alone. That's something that struck me listening to these 6 families who are experiencing a division that they can't reconcile, pain that they can't end. And it's just important to know that you're not alone. And 2, that you don't have to suffer in silence. That this community here at church, that God is with you in this. And that even the reconciliation that we can't accomplish, God can. And we don't know what that's going to look like, and that's okay. But again, we have good company not only in the other people that we might know or bump into, our neighbors who are in similar situations, but St. Francis of Assisi, he never reconciled with his dad. There's that story of his conversion where there are different versions of the story, but the essential detail is that he makes a huge public spectacle of giving away his father's silk and other cloth. He was a cloth merchant, very wealthy, prominent businessman in the town of Assisi. And Francis wants to rid himself and completely reject that. Francis is the prodigal son. He completely rejects his father in a very public way, and it was absolutely humiliating for his dad. Francis goes on, he grows into his faith, grows into the man that God created him to be, this universal brother that lived in harmony with all of creation. He reconciled with the wolf of Gubbio, but he never was able to reconcile with his own dad. Never once spoke to him after his conversion. If this is you, you're in good company. Sorry. And I think, too, we have every reason to imagine and believe that as Francis got to heaven, as he gets there, he would have seen some of his brothers, the other Franciscans that had preceded him. He would have seen so many of the poor, beggars, lepers that he embraced, people that he helped, people that he introduced to Jesus, but he also would have met his dad. And somehow, in a way that Francis couldn't do on his own, God was able to bring them together. And maybe when we get to heaven, we're going to see Francis sitting next to his dad, enjoying a banquet feast. Lent is a time for us to trust in God's mercy. Because again, God's mercy can do what we can't. God can mend what is torn, can make whole what is broken, even if we can't. So in the backs of the papers here, we have a couple of questions for reflection. And again, we'll follow the same format as we did yesterday. So feel free, if you do have a nice winter coat, to go into the church or to spread out. Sorry, Brother Rob. And let's see what time it is. So it's 10:38 today. It's 10:38 right now. So maybe if we want to say at 11, we'll keep that same time. At 11, we'll come back and just gather around the small tables, the round tables, for some time for sharing. But the questions are, have you ever experienced reconciliation in your life? And especially reconciliation with another person? Because I think in some ways, reconciliation with God is easier than reconciliation with each other. And that's just a fact of life. So have you ever experienced reconciliation in a relationship in your life? And then are there any relationships that need forgiveness, mercy, or reconciliation? And just to take these questions, to take the story of the prodigal son, maybe looking at the reluctant brother a little bit differently, and just to see where God is present in your reality, where God is present in your need for mercy.